I am an outsider, an outcast from society, living alone in a castle on the outskirts of a village. My existence has been a solitary one, never venturing beyond the walls of my home, but I have always longed to see the world outside. I have lived in this place for a long time, but cannot remember how long. The only thing I remember is to be cared by unknown beings, but cannot recall any person except myself. The only other living things in the castle were rats, bats, and spiders, and I associated the bones and skeletons in the castle with everyday events. Everything I know was taken from books because I had no teacher or guidance. I never heard a human voice or spoke aloud, and I had no concept of my own appearance as there were no mirrors in the castle. But I felt young because I had little memory. I would often dream outside of the castle about the things I read in the books, longingly picturing myself in the world beyond the forest. Sometimes I attempted to escape throughout the forest, but the further I went, the darker and more fearful it became, and always I returned to the castle. But I knew that it was better to die trying to glimpse the sky than to live without ever seeing it. One day, I decided to explore my home. I found a long stairway and climbed until it ended. The climb was slow and terrifying, the darkness never lifting. When I reached the top, found an observation chamber. It was beautiful. I found a locked door, opened it with great effort, and there it was, the moonlight. I was filled with ecstasy when I saw the full moon shining through an ornate grating of iron. After taking a closer look, I was astonished by what I saw. Instead of treetops, there was solid ground, marble slabs and columns, and an ancient stone church. I opened the grating and stumbled out onto a white gravel path. My mind was chaotic and I still craved light. I didn't know if this was real or a dream, but I wanted to see more. I wandered through the open country, following a visible road sometimes, and sometimes leaving it to tread across meadows with ruins. After a long trip, I found an ivied castle in a thickly wooded park that seemed familiar but also strange. The moat was filled in and some towers were demolished. Its condition was pitiful, but its atmosphere had something that attracted me. The windows were open and the sound of revelry came from inside. I looked in and saw a group of people dressed oddly and speaking in a language I didn't understand. Some of their faces seemed familiar, while others were completely strange. When I entered a brightly lit room, immediately there was a terrifying reaction from the people inside. They were overcome with intense fear and began to scream. They all tried to flee. Some fell in a swoon and were dragged away. Others covered their eyes and stumbled blindly to escape. The room was filled with the sounds of panicked flight, furniture being overturned and people stumbling against the walls as they tried to reach the doors. I stood alone in an apartment, listening to shocking cries and trembling at the thought if there were somebody else that scared those people. The room seemed empty, but as I walked towards an alcove, I sensed movement beyond a golden arched doorway. As I approached, I clearly perceived the presence and saw a monstrous being that horrified me and caused a group of people to flee in terror. His skin was a sickly pale color, with patches of what appeared to be mold growing in certain areas. His eyes were sunken and dark, with a wild, crazed look in them. His mouth was twisted into a snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. I could see the veins pulsing through his skin, and his limbs were twisted and elongated in a way that made them appear almost insect-like. It was a grotesque monster with a twisted, inhuman form. An abomination, a creature that should not exist, and I was filled with a sense of despair and hopelessness. I was paralyzed, but I tried to flee. My eyes couldn't close, as they were fixated on the terrible creature in front of me. I tried to raise my hand to shield myself from the sight, but my nerves were too stunned to obey. I stumbled forward, but I became aware of the creature's proximity, and I threw out my hand to ward it off. But then, my fingers touched the rotting paw of the monster beneath the golden arch, and it was a moment of complete nightmare. I could see the horrible face of that creature looking at me. That apparition horrified me, and I ran back to my castle as fast as I could. I felt something almost impossible to define in words. I was desolated, feeling revulsion, shock, and horror. So I locked myself in my room and spent the rest of my days alone. I know that I will always be an outsider, a stranger in this century and among those who are still human. This realization came to me when I reached out to touch the monstrous creature in the gilded frame, to find it was only a surface of polished glass.